Hi everybody, I'm going to show you how to create a text effect that kind of looks like Liquid, something like this one. In the process I'll show you how to use a few different filters as well as a new tool, the layer styles menu that will allow you to apply stylistic things to your layers, things like borders and stroke lines and shadows and bevel and emboss and just things that kind of add a little bit of embellishment on the borders usually. So first, first thing I'm going to show you how to do though, let me just close this, is actually get something set up for a filter. So get that, I'm going to ask you to get that leaf image from Google Classroom and actually first convert it to grayscale. It'll probably be full color when you import it. However, if you go to image mode grayscale, it doesn't really matter. All you're going to do is just apply some blur to this. So it's going to be black and white because the way the filter is going to work is it's going to apply the filter differently depending on how much black or how much white is in the image. So, and this is just sort of going to be a map for the filter to apply. So that's sort of farther down the line. But for now, in order for the effect to not, when we use that effect later, for it to not look like weird and fake, you're going to want it to be a little bit blurry. So click blur, so filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Set the radius to 2.5 pixels. It's just a little bit of blur. It's not super crisp. And this will help us when we need to apply a filter later. So just save this as a PSD file. Make sure it's, I'm going to call it something like displace because that is the effect we're going to be using later. And we're going to want to use this as a displacement map. Make sure it's a PSD file, Photoshop file. That's what it has to be for this to work. Save that, and then you don't even really need this anymore as a Photoshop file. Doesn't need to be there. Create another new image. This time, this is actually going to be our final product. So this is no, it's not that one. I tried to copy that thing so many times, and then it copies when I don't want it to. Of course, it copied that little banner. Anyway, let me go back and fix that mistake. Sorry for the delay. I need to recopy my leaf image because that tiny little strip of space was something that I tried to copy before repeatedly and it wouldn't work until I decided I would just give up on it copying, and I assumed it hadn't saved that to my clipboard, but it did. Because you can always count on Photoshop to do things that you don't expect it to do. You can always expect the unexpected. Alright, back to where I need to be. Just pasting the leaf image. Alright, so now that this is actually going to be the sort of the final product here. This like the first black and white image was not the final product. It's just something for an effect later. It was a sort of temporary file that we're going to use as like a tool later. This is where your final image is going to be. You can go ahead and save this as like your actual file name. I'm going to call mine liquid text. And then once you have that saved, first just make some text. So I recommend a sans serif font, like a font without like little lines on the bottom. Think like, don't do something like Times New Roman or something like that where it has those little like lines in the feet of the letters. Something round is good too. So we'll just look at the samples. Personally, I like Arial Rounded MT Bold for this. It's very very rounded. It doesn't have any like jagged sort of edges or serifs or anything like that. This will be good because it'll look like bubbles. It'll look like bubbles of liquid. You should have a large font size. I chose 72, and for now, black is fine, I guess. And then just type whatever message that you want to turn into liquid. I'm just going to type liquid text. Alright, so next what we'll need to do is with the liquid text layer selected, so that this filter applies to this layer, we're going to distort it a little bit. So click filter, distort, and the distortion we're going to use is wave. So we're going to kind of make it a little bit wavy. When it asks you if you want to convert it to a smart object, say yes. Do not choose rasterize. That'll turn it into pixels, and then it won't be able to treat it like text anymore, so you'll lose the ability to sort of edit text things. You don't really want that. We still want it to be a text object, so we can still edit things that are, you know, so we can still apply effects that it would be able to apply to text objects that are not just raster graphics. Raster graphics are just sort of pictures made of pixels. So if you think of, you know, just think about when you zoom in. I'm just going to show you here. You know, when you zoom way in on an image in Photoshop, you see how it starts to get pixelated, and eventually to the point you can actually see individual squares. These are pixels, right? This is what the whole thing is made of. The whole picture is actually just a grid of these different colored squares. Well, in the way it's actually represented as data, the text isn't represented strictly as a grid of squares. It has a whole bunch of additional information that it stores about it, as long as it's not just raster graphics. So, for example, if you want to go back and edit the text, I can still click here. I could change what the words are. I wouldn't be able to do that if I converted it to raster graphics, because it would just be a bunch of pixels. You can't just sort of type on. You can't just type a grid of pixels. You can't edit it like it's text. Photoshop isn't going to recognize it as text anymore once you convert it to a raster object, which would just be a grid of pixels like everything else. If you zoom in, it looks like pixels because, you know, in Photoshop everything everything can be viewed down at the pixel level, but you wouldn't actually be able to edit these pixels directly as long as it's still text. So back to that effect. I was doing filter, distort, wave. I want smart object, and then you can see the more generators means more waves. Well, I don't want it to be that wavy. I'm going to choose 3. I'm going to choose a wavelength minimum of 10, maximum of 50. So I don't want too much possible wavelength. Minimum amplitude of 3, maximum of 20. And you'll see if you change these settings, you know, it can get very, very wavy, all the way down to like almost not wavy at all. I'm choosing the lower end of most of these ranges. I'm leaving my scale at 1 and 26. Notice to me most of these are sort of the lower end of the possible ranges of numbers. I don't want that much wave, so I'm just going to click OK, and it should add a little bit of wave. If it's not so wavy that you can't read it. Alright, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some changes in the layer style window. So the way I do that is I'll just right click on my text layer, so my layer that says liquid text. I'm going to right click on that and choose blending options. It brings up this menu that says layer style on top, and you can add all kinds of different styles, make some stylistic changes. So you know, there's all kinds of stuff available here. bevel and emboss that basically adds like sort of a three-dimensional looking textures, like it's sticking out from the canvas or sunk into the canvas. You can add strokes, which is lines. You can add inner shadows, outer shadows, gradients, glow. So there's a lot of different effects you can add. It's a really useful menu. What I'm going to do is, in my basic blending options, I just want to make sure that the blend mode is actually set to multiply. We're not going to just be laying this text, like this text is not going to be a solid object just resting on top of this leaf. It's going to be blending with the leaf behind it. So you'll notice that, like, besides the normal blend mode, a lot of blend modes, a lot of blend modes kind of end up being a bit transparent looking and mostly just affecting whatever is behind that layer. Multiply is just like that. What it does, if you look up the actual, the way it does its thing, it multiplies the colors. I'm not really sure exactly what multiplying colors means. I'll just tell you that the end result is a darker color. So it's kind of, I guess it's kind of supposed to, I think it's supposed to emulate some sort of traditional photography technique. I don't know. All you really need to know is if you use this, it ends up darkening the colors. So rather than just having this text sitting on top of the leaf being this opaque block of text, it's just going to have an impact on the stuff behind it. In this case, we're using this multiply blend mode, which will darken it a bit, but we're going to add a whole bunch of additional effects as well. You'll see what the end result is just going to be that it kind of looks like bubbles of text. So there's the multiply blend mode. Set the opacity for the layer. The general opacity for the layer should be 100%, but then the fill opacity, so the actual inside of the text, should actually be 0. All right, so the text is going to briefly go away. Don't worry about that. 'Cause the reason we want the general blend, like the general opacity to be 100% is everything on the outside of the text, like the borders and stuff like that. We actually want that to be visible. We just don't want to actually see the black text on the inside, because it's going to cover up all the effects that we want to add later. So fill opacity 0. Next thing to choose is bevel and emboss. This will give it some sort of a sense of depth. Just make sure you choose inner bevel. Smooth. And generally none of these things that we're adding are going to be very big. We just want to have a subtle effect applied to this text. So 5 pixels is what I chose, just a small amount. Opacity 75% for the highlights and the shadows. And let's add the next effect. So you can see it's starting to kind of look like this transparent liquid already, but we're going to warp it a little bit more still to make it look even more realistically liquid. So the next thing we'll add is some shadow. So click drop shadow. Set the opacity for that shadow to 75%. And you'll probably have to change more of your settings than me, because I tested all of these out. I tested all of these out right before I made this video, so all of my settings are already set to what they used to be. So choose for distance, spread, and size 5 pixels, 0, and 5 pixels. All right, and at that point, you're going to be done with that layer styles menu. Next thing you should do is we're actually going to need to make a selection that's shaped like the text itself. So to do that, actually hold the control key. So while holding the control key, you're going to click on this thumbnail image. The actual like little picture of the text, don't click on the whole layer. Hold Control and click on the sort of thumbnail image for the text right here. And you'll see what it does is it highlights just the text with the sort of marching ants, as if that's the selection. So the selection is just the text. Then what you're going to do is actually select the background layer, the layer, not the background, like if you have a white background, don't select that. I mean, select the leaf layer. So I chose my layer 1, it's the leaf. We're going to apply text-shaped effects to the leaf. Right? This is a common technique that we've used. We've used this before a couple of times where you make a selection and then you choose a different layer to apply that selection to. So we made a selection using the text, so it's text-shaped selection. However, we're applying this effect to a text-shaped selection of the leaf. So we're applying this effect to the leaf because really, when you think about it, you can't really see water very well. It's a clear liquid. A lot of times what you're seeing is reflections off of the water, or you're seeing things through the water. There isn't much to see with water because it's mostly transparent. So that's kind of what we're trying to emulate here, is you can't really see the water so very well. It's mostly transparent, but you can see, some shadows that are cast, and you can see the thing behind it, but the thing behind it is going to be warped because when you look through water, it's warped, and that kind of thing. So this is why we should have the leaf layer selected. With that leaf layer selected, choose Filter, Distort, Spherize. And so this is going to kind of warp it so it's, it kind of looks like there's a bubble there. So you can see the sample, it's just kind of warped. It just kind of looks like there's some sort of bubble. Click OK to apply that, and now there should you could see the bits of the leaf that are underneath the bubble are kind of offset, as if light is refracting through it. So we're almost done here. It's starting to look pretty liquid already. While you still have this selection from that previous step, we'll add a few more subtle effects. One will be image, adjustments, brightness, contrast. We'll just up the brightness just a little bit. And we'll also add a stroke. So still with this selection, and still the same layer active. It should be the leaf layer. Just click Edit, Stroke, and a very small 1 pixel stroke, and then this is just a border on the outside of the letters. It's going to be really thin, but it'll just help to define the letters a little bit more crisply. And the way you can select your color is when you, so let me cancel this and show you again. There's this color block, click on it, don't even pick a color. You can actually sample because it gives you the eyedropper, the sample eyedropper right away, just by default. Just click one of the darker greens. You can click maybe like a green down here, or a green in this sort of streak right here where it's pretty dark. Just click one of the darker shades of green, click OK. You should have a pretty dark green, and it'll apply a dark green outline. It'll look a little bit better than just plain black because black will stick out a little too much against all of this green, but a dark green will still have the same effect of kind of making the letters pop a little bit more. And then finally, last thing we're going to do is we're going to apply that displacement map that we made a long time ago. So selecting the text layer this time, so go back to selecting the text layer. You're going to go Filter, Distort, Displace. Set the horizontal and vertical scales to 3. Make sure it's the map is set stretch to fit in undefined areas. Repeat edge pixels. Click OK. It's going to ask you what you want to use as a displacement map. So it's going to, this displacement effect is going to help this, it'll just add a little bit more warp to it. So you should have that displace.psd file that you created earlier. Click that, click open, and it should warp it just a little bit more. And it should blur it a little bit, just like the, it applied it's a really subtle effect. It hopefully should kind of make it pop a little bit. Like it should give it um, a little bit more depth, like it's more 3D, like a bubble. So if you deselect now, what you should have is some liquid text. It kind of looks like it's made out of bubbles of water.